I'm a firm believer that you can learn so much from someone else from another culture by asking questions, as long as you do it with curiosity, right? Not with judgment. Just be curious. People love talking about themselves.
Hello, my name is Shirley Kavanagh, and you're very welcome to the Leadership Discoveries podcast. In this series, I chat with leaders across a variety of sectors and geographies who share their experience and views on a range of leadership topics. And today I'm delighted to have with me Dr. Eimear Nolan. Eimear is an Associate Professor of International Business at Trinity Business School in Dublin. And she's also Director of the Flexible Executive MBA. She's held academic positions in both the UK and the USA also. And her research interests are in expatriate adjustment, cultural agility, recruitment and retention strategies. Lots of interesting topics there. And Eimear also works directly with organisations to increase management and employees' cultural intelligence. Eimear, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Shirley. And what a wonderful introduction.
You sound fabulous, I have to say, and I know you are. The Flexible Executive MBA, can we just start with that? Because I know there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who talk about MBAs, who are interested perhaps in MBAs, but what you have is something quite different, actually. So just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Yeah, it is different. And it kind of speaks to actually what you had mentioned in the beginning there, my love for anything around cross-cultural communication and learning from each other from across the world. So I moved back from the US in 2018 and I joined Trinity Business School. And at the time, they had face-to-face MBAs. So this idea was floating around. So this was pre-COVID. This idea was floating around about perhaps developing another strand to the MBA, a more online version, and if I'd be interested in leading that. So I immediately jumped on it, probably primarily really because I thought how wonderful would it be to have people from around the world learn from each other, where you have not only the subject areas that we're teaching, but then when they're in discussions, they're looking at things through their own cultural lens or perspective. So I was really, really excited. So that was, I suppose, the grain that really got me interested in it. And then secondly, at the time and still now, I'm a mother of two. My kids at the time were really, really young. So like brand new baby and 4. And I thought, gosh, if I wanted to go back to education again, I couldn't. Okay. With a full-time job, looking after 2 kids, living on the, if I wanted to go to Trinity, I was living on the, I live on the West Coast, the East. And I thought I wouldn't have the potential to do that. And how great would it be to have this opportunity to develop a program that would allow people in scenarios similar to my own to go back to education, because we talk a lot about education for like outreach programs, for example. But I always feel like there's very little conversation about an outreach program for people who have busy lives, who are, a lot of the people who come on our program are really in high-end leadership roles now. And just being not able to get back to commit to coming in at the weekends or commit to coming in the evenings because of everything they're trying to juggle. So from that, then I started out planning the Flexible Executive MBA in 2018. And so the whole idea of this program is it's primarily asynchronous, which means that when people come on the program, predominantly most of what they're learning is asynchronous. It's not live. Okay. So I give them like 2-week windows to cover a certain amount of content, and that kind of flows over every 2 weeks. And there's like lovely stop gaps, I call them, that like we're all great at saying, okay, we'll take on this extra work. But in order to make sure that people keep up with it, every 2 weeks, if you don't do the work, you kind of can't get on to the next 2 weeks. So there's that kind of checkpoint and a checkpoint with us too. And then at the beginning of the program, it's really important to meet people face to face initially in global virtual teams, because that's effectively what these people are, right? They're coming to take education in a global virtual environment and work very, very closely with each other in these teams. They come to campus the first week in September to us for like 5 days. We call it an immersion week, where they get to meet each other. They get to network, like we do speed networking and everything like that. And they get to understand as well what it's like to learn online, which is quite different. A lot of people think, oh, it's much easier. I would argue, I think it's actually a lot more difficult, because the bonds that you make in a classroom and all the subtle cues that you can see physically when you're in a classroom, they're all lost in a virtual environment. So it takes a lot longer to establish those connections and have that commitment. And also that sense of resilience, that when you're trying to juggle everything in the classroom, you could turn to someone beside you and go, God, this is hard. Are you finding the same? But that's actually a little bit more difficult in a virtual setting. So the program is 2 years in length, as disastrous as COVID was. What it did do, on a positive note, if you try to just put out some positives out of something like that, is it allowed everyone to understand that, you know what, if it's done right, you don't have to come in all the time to learn. If it's structured in the right way, if the philosophy around the teaching is correct about how to do that, it's possible. And people became far more comfortable anyway with things like online meetings and Zoom. And the professors also were amazing. So they all upskilled and took training on how to teach online. So the program now is, since it launched kind of just as COVID really got a grip, which, like I said, that wasn't meant to happen. It just happened in 2020. We're going strong. We've had 2 outgoing cohorts who've graduated, and the people who come on are wonderful. And they come from all over the world, high-end leadership roles across all disciplines. And I really think they actually not only graduate with an MBA, they graduate with an MBA also in cultural agility and understanding the vast differences in how people work, how people manage time or see time, for example, how they communicate, whether it's kind of more nuanced or is it just really direct. Like all of these things they have to work through
Mhm.
on top of actually completing their MBA. So it's challenging, but at the end of the day, hopefully they all come out smiling and they're wonderful. So yeah, so that's the flexible MBA at Trinity Business School.
And thanks for that, Eimear. And there's a real lived experience there from you, and just, sort of caught when you were talking about yourself and your children and how, you have this understanding of what it's like for people who could be learning as well in organizations. One thing that you just said there, which, I think the whole piece around online learning, not just in an educational setting, but within an organizational setting as well. And there are some parallels coming into my head in relation to when you talk about setting it up for success. And I think one of the things that you just talked about there was people meeting together at the beginning to sort of, build the bonds or whatever, and then going into their online learning environment. Does that translate into the organizational context as well, do you think?
Yeah. Do you know what? It really does. And just to pull back, the first year we launched this program, about 2 weeks before it started, COVID restrictions in Ireland happened. And so we were forced to actually abandon that in-person week. And so we have a room in the business school that's purposely built to bring in students, on big screens. It's called the Matrix Room. So that first class happened through these Matrix Room for the 5 days. I stood there and I watched the students, it was still, 9 to 5, but virtually. And to me, I thought, gosh, I wonder if there's any need to actually have them meet face to face, because these students forged huge bonds to the point that if one was traveling and happened to be passing through the country that someone else lived in, they'd pop off and say hi. And they were arranging these get togethers. So I really began to think maybe we don't actually need this face to face element. And so the second year we ran with the face to face to kind of compare, and we got feedback from both. And so the feedback was like outstanding in the sense, and overwhelming, do not get rid of the face to face part. And so when those students who met the first year online and then met face to face the second year, they had that direct contrast, right, of one never meeting and then two suddenly meeting. And they said that the things they didn't know what they had missed out on by not meeting until they had met face to face. Okay. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So if you're an organization and you're having a lot of sessions online, I mean, there's a place for that and it's fantastic. But a lot of the time, having just like these small intervals where people do meet, people don't understand the benefit until they actually do it a lot of the time, because again, it's probably at a subconscious level that we bond with each other. Well, it is that we bond with each other to a large degree. And it's just that little bit more difficult. Also, in an online environment, you don't really get an opportunity to talk one-on-one with someone because you're in a room together that's virtual. Whereas if you had met and you were in the classroom for a little bit and you walked out then maybe to get a coffee, you may walk with one person or two people and get to know them and make those friendships a little bit deeper. After that, the team decided to kind of survey, where should we go with this? Should we keep it online or face to face? And like I said, just from the feedback and then the feedback of the group that had met face to face originally, I said to them, okay, if we were now to say that won't happen anymore, how do you feel about that? They were all like, absolutely no. I'm still waiting for the person who says, actually, I'll just go online, because online sometimes is easier as well. These people are traveling from all over the world. So they're not just popping in from 30 minutes. They're flying in from as far away as Australia into the immersion week. So it'd be far easier for them to say, you know what, Eimear, don't do it anymore. It's too much cost. But they don't. They feel that that's really important. I think that's a really important point for industry also to realize is there's a place for both. And like for us, we only do that 5 days at the beginning of each year. And that just gives them enough foundation to keep them going for the rest of the time. So it doesn't have to be a massive commitment to it either, but it has to be a really meaningful and thought through pedagogical commitment for those 5 days on what you're trying to establish and why. So there's no point getting them to meet not knowing why.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, you might want to give them information. That's fine. That's at a surface level. Why? But like deep down, why do you want these people to get together? What are you trying to establish? And for me, it was trying to establish a commitment to each other. On the program, every module they take has group work, and therefore they need, like I say to everyone, you come on, you get an MBA for yourself, yes, but you also get it for everybody else on that program. And you need to work as a strong team, because there's sometimes you won't be able to do something and you'll need someone to pick up the slack, and vice versa. So you need to have that. And I think, for things like that, it's really good being able to master that when they're with you.
I love that phrase, this commitment to each other, actually, and it does translate directly into organizations in terms of people working together like that, and particularly from the learning environment. It's really, really interesting. Can we just talk, Eimear, move into this cultural intelligence space? Because already, you've dipped into cultural awareness, you've mentioned cultural agility, culture, huge, big topic. We don't have 10 hours for this conversation, but first of all, I'm just interested, what actually piqued your interest in this whole cultural space? Was it your own experience or what?
Yeah, mostly whatever piques my interest happens to be something that I've experienced. I've learned very quickly that I don't do anything really unless I've experienced something that's piqued some kind of an interest in me. Yeah. So I was on a completely different trajectory in my life. I started out, as you know, I went training in culinary arts and hospitality management, and being an academic or the space of culture, never even, cooking. That's all I wanted to do. But in the process of that, and as time went on, I moved to Spain for a year without any Spanish, which in hindsight, not a good idea.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but great learning experience.
Yeah.
And for anyone listening or yourself, the Spanish are incredibly open to, if you say hola, they're like, oh my God, and they like jump on you and encourage you so much to try, and they're so respectful as well of the fact that you're trying to learn. I would have considered I moved to probably one of the most supportive cultures to go to, not knowing their language. And, the first few months were fine. And then I began to, I suppose the best way to put it, what made me Eimear in Ireland did not make me Eimear in Spain. So what people would have saw as my personality traits, they didn't necessarily transfer very well. So Irish people are very sarcastic. And if we like you, we are even more sarcastic with you. Well, that doesn't translate very well to a culture that doesn't work the same way. So I began to feel, I suppose, at times a little bit misunderstood. And then I felt like, gosh, I felt like I was always I have to create this new identity of who I am here, because it's not the same as the person. So it starts to challenge all those inner values and assumptions and beliefs that you have, and you don't even know really why you have them, because you've grown up with them, and that's what culture is. But I started to go through all of this, and I remember, like, there was just that one point one day I was going with someone and we were going towards a McDonald's. And at this point, I could order McDonald's, right,
Right.
in Spanish. It wasn't good, but I could be understood. And I just could not do it. And I said to the person, can you just order it? And the person said to me, but no, like this is how you learn. You have to practice. And honestly, all I wanted to do was like hide in under a duvet and not come out again. And I didn't know why I was feeling all of this. So I was actually embarrassed and I just had no idea of all the emotions that I was feeling. So fast forward, I managed to kind of get through it. And I went back. And when I was in Spain, I noticed huge turnover, obviously, in the hospitality industry. And I wanted to learn more around how to retain employees and things like that. So I went back to university to do a master's in UL in Ireland in human resource management. And I remember during our first few weeks, the professor came in and he started to talk. Now, this is going back 20 years. He started to talk about this thing called culture shock. And I thought, oh my God, what I went through is actually a thing. I had no idea. And he talked about how people feel misunderstood and lonely and irritable and all those kind of things. And then he started to say, you know what? There's ways you can actually help. So if you know you go through, if we know in theory says most people will experience it to some degree, just knowing that it's something that you may experience can combat a lot of the actual feelings because you know it you're not, as I felt, I wasn't the weirdo. I just thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And I think in that class sitting there is where my entire career path went
Right.
completely. So I thought, okay, during that we had to do a dissertation in something. I thought it's absolutely in culture shock or cultural adjustment. And I thought, okay, as a chef, who am I really going to hurt if I give someone, like if I don't really understand the nuances in the back of the kitchen, and not very many. So, what profession would this actually have profound impacts for? And I straight away I thought healthcare sector. Ireland is, has so many, we rely on so many non-nationals. So I did my master's on Indian nurses down in Waterford Regional Hospital on their cultural adjustment to Ireland, and it was interviews and it was so fascinating the stories that they shed to me, like how they felt misunderstood, right? Because in Ireland we a large part of our socializing does, because I think, to be honest, around the weather, revolve around a pub, and they felt that it's not correct for them to go into a pub. So they felt like that the Irish nurses didn't fully understand. They weren't just saying no because they didn't want to socialize. They were saying no as to where the socializing was happening. And so they started to speak about that. So then I thought, oh, this is so who else could I talk to? And then I thought, oh my gosh, all the doctors that are coming for here. What is happening? So that led into that same professor who walked in that day and talked about culture shock. I plagued him and he became my supervisor for my PhD then in the cross-cultural adjustment and person environment fit of international NCHDs, they're called in Ireland, non-consultant hospital doctors in Ireland. And that's really, so it was really down to an experience I had that really profoundly shook me in a sense of who I am and how who I am changes depending on where I am. And that's not to say you have to adopt another culture, but it means you have to adjust. And what really nice is you can take bits of all the different cultures you lived in and kind of mush them all together. And when you go home, when I came back from America, and back to Ireland, I had to go through this whole readjustment of what it's like to live in Ireland again. So when I taught in the US, I used to use the Irish lingo first. So I'd say like the bin or the garage. And then more of my classes involved students putting their hands up, going, what do you mean? What's a bin? I changed my lingo to say the trash can and the garage and water. And I changed the way I spoke so that people would understand me easier and that wouldn't be so much of a barrier. But when I came home, an Irish sarcasm, I remember standing at the side of a hurling pitch. I think I was only, my kid was there. I don't play hurling. And someone just said to me, gosh, do you know, you're not in America anymore. Would you stop using those words? And I thought, oh my God, here we go again. And so like a readjustment to unlearn parts of what I learned to fit in somewhere else, I need to readjust. So that's actually called, you can call it lots of things, but it's like a re-entry culture shock where you have to then the person that you went away with and the person you come back as are relatively two different people. And your memory is only remembering the person you left at. And then you realize you're also now not really fully understood, even back in your own culture. So, it's exciting, it's interesting, but that's where That's where all of it came from. The interest came from, and it just spanned out from there.
It's great. And I have to say, I do know what a bin is, by the way.
Oh,
So,
good.
and for our American listeners, of course, it's the trash can. Just around that whole piece of, assimilating into a new culture. So when we think of leaders in organizations, can we prepare people or can we educate people? Or is it something you have to learn by doing almost, and reflecting your experience? What's the best way for people who might be going on expatriate assignments, particularly, I'm thinking of?
I'm going to break that down into 2 points. So, yeah, I do a lot of consultancy where I go into companies and I speak to them about this concept of what it is, why it matters. The whole focus there is to bring awareness, right? And that's what I lacked when I went to Spain. I was not aware that things like this could happen or the impact it could have on me. Now that I'm aware that the impact it can have on others, right? So as a leader, understanding and being aware, first off, if you have employees coming from other cultures, they're not only trying to understand what it's like to work in your company or work for you or work for the climate in which your organization operates. They're also trying to understand where to get their food that they like, how the housing system works, how to make friends, how to socialize. So everything that they're used to overall has changed, not only in their work life, but in their personal life. And just a simple awareness of that, that you can meet an employee in a corridor and say, hey, how are you getting on? How are you fitting in? It was Thanksgiving a couple of weeks ago. How did that go for you? That kind of simple, almost most people would see as maybe even as irrelevant, means so much to someone when they're feeling lonely and when they feel misunderstood. Having someone actually acknowledge that, it's not just only in the organization that you're trying to get used to, it's actually everything. And how is that going? So the awareness part for me is key, right? And anything after that is upskilling and experience. Okay. So most people, and luckily, we have so many people now working together from different cultures that really everyone to a large degree is going through the same thing, just coming from a different culture. So there is an experience part of it that is essential. And then the learning part. I mean, there's just so many resources now that you can use to read, whether it's newspaper articles or just to read like journal papers, podcasts like this, just to understand what makes people different. So there's like I mentioned before, you have communication styles. So there's some cultures that will like to give feedback in a very direct way because they see it as very productive. It's not meant to be a way to insult or offend. It's actually seen as a really good thing to say, hey, no, that's not good. This is what might be better. That's not to insult you. That's to actually make the outcome better for everybody. But if you're coming from a culture where it's more nuanced and you don't say those things, you're going to get really offended when someone says that to you. And you can learn these. These are mapped out to say in certain cultural contexts, this is what, for example, someone from Ireland prefers, whereas this is what someone from the Netherlands will prefer. And yes, you can learn those things and understand that not everyone sees the world through the same lens that you do. And when people do irritate you, or when you irritate someone else, instead of being reactionary and thinking it's them, certainly not me, stop and think, gosh, where could that communication have broken down? And I promise you, more often than not, it's probably a cultural misunderstanding that's happened where there's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of understanding the other's perspective. And there, absolutely, you can build on and you can learn, and you can only you can learn a lot in books, but I really do think the best way to
Yeah.
learn is by mistake. So, you'll learn by getting yourself in those scenarios. Where you won't learn is by getting yourself in those scenarios and blaming someone else for it. You'll only learn if you stop and take a moment and say, could this actually be down to a misunderstanding? And then navigating your way through that. And I think people are pretty open in general. And I think also, sorry, I'm probably ranting now here. There's so much going on in my mind. I think also people, there's been a lot of movements recently that have caused people to be a lot more cautious about talking about differences or talking about anything that may suggest that you're from another culture. I don't think that was the function of why all of these movements started, but it's most certainly the one of the not so great outcomes that happened. Because if we don't ask people and we're not curious, how are we ever going to learn anything? I'm a firm believer that you can learn so much from someone else from another culture by asking questions, as long as you do it with curiosity, right? Not with judgment. Just be curious. People love talking about themselves. So look at me. I've taken up the last how many minutes. So, like, people love it. And if you start to ignore it, where is that getting anybody? So I think there's definitely always a level of respect around things. So if you're like, oh, I mightn't, be cautious on what you ask about, but use your common sense. And on the other side of it, be curious, be inquisitive. And, it's not about trying to alleviate the differences. It's about understanding them. That's all.
And what you're saying is so important, particularly at this time in the world, where there are sensitivities. And I think the point you're making is really important that, if things are coming from a good place, if we're asking to learn more, and it's okay to make mistakes, isn't it? And often we can kind of get ourselves tied up in knots because we're afraid to say something in case it's the wrong thing to say.
Oh, yeah.
But I presume what you're saying is if we're doing it with good intent and articulating it as such, it's far better doing that.
Far better doing it than doing nothing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nothing's always, in situations where we have to work together, we have to be productive together in organizations, avoiding any form of, like, I mean, you might as well just avoid communicating.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
and run it through AI if you want this perfect outcome. But as humans, we have to understand that what makes us all different also makes us so much better together when we work together, because we come up with far more ideas. We're far more innovative. We're far more inquisitive. We're actually far more productive when we work with people. Because, like I had said with the MBA, if you had a boardroom and you put a question and there was like 5 executives and they're all of one culture and you give them a question, yeah, okay, great. They'll come up with maybe 5, 6 solutions, right? Now change and everyone is a different culture. So now you have 5 different cultures. Give them the same question, you'll probably have 30 ideas. And so that is so powerful for an organization to render and use instead of being too afraid to do it. The whole thing is about being inquisitive, taking the time to understand. And I think another point I've noticed is when you start talking about culture and understanding another culture, people become rather protective of their own. And they say, oh, well, this person is in my culture. They need to act. Well, okay, but that's not what we're talking about. We're only, so people become very defensive very, very quickly because we're all feel our culture is the culture. And so just taking a step back from that defensiveness and digging a
Mhm.
little bit deeper and saying, but why do I need to do this? And for a company, the statistics speak for themselves as to why.
And just as you're talking, I'm curious just your view in relation to this. Do you think there is some correlation between cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence? Because empathy seems to be coming through from what you're saying as well there. So I'm just wondering, just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there is. That's going to be the difference as to where you understand how to say something in the correct way.
Hmm.
And I don't mean being correct in you're correct in what you're saying, but the tone or reading the body language or understand, or sometimes even understanding, maybe I shouldn't be inquisitive beyond this point on that topic, which is all down to the emotional intelligence as well. Absolutely. I mean, they're heavily linked. Yeah.
Yeah. And you just mentioned earlier on there artificial intelligence. And I know you've got a deep interest in this. Just what are your hopes and fears for generative AI?
Yeah, God, that's a minefield, isn't it? That's a huge question.
We don't have that long now.
Don't have that long. Yeah, no. Like anything, technology is going to evolve. AI is here. It's here to stay, and it is going to get better at what it does, right? Because anything that learns from itself, as we're talking about now, whether it's technology or humans, they will advance. So a lot of my interest around AI is I actually did a course recently in MIT on it, AI and strategy in business. And I'm really interested because I feel there's a place for it that's really, really good. I also like to say to people, it's not like a calculator because I hear that a lot. Well, when the calculator came in, no, the calculator didn't tell you what to do. You told the calculator what to do, and then it gave you the correct answer if you plugged it in right. That's not how AI works. A lot of what I'm writing on or researching is just the cautionary notes, I guess, around And especially when it comes to the cultural context, if you rely, or if students or if anyone really relies too much on the output. So AI only learns from what's inputted, right? And it process and output. But if what's inputted is been inputted by countries that have access to it and resources for it, over time, the outputs will become very homogenous in the way it's done, right? And it will only reflect the beliefs and values of the highest inputs. So therefore, you have a lot of cultures around the world that don't even have access to a computer, that don't have access to put their inputs in to have them reflected. And so I think it's great. It can be used to speed up things. I think it's everyone should try it. But when you become more serious tasks of, like, now there's research out there that says the number one thing AI has been used for is for idea generation. So creating new ideas. I think that's kind of a little bit worrying, right? Because those idea creations that it's coming back with are only speaking to the inputs from the societies that are inputting into it, to which point you're creating actually a bigger gap between cultures.
Emer, just as you're talking there, even it really plays to this importance in terms of the diversity of people involved in the creation of technology solutions. There was a report I read recently that in Europe, for instance, 20% of the 10 million ICT specialists are actually female, for instance. And that doesn't even take account of diversity in terms of geographic, social strata, or whatever it is. So isn't there a real sense that organizations, or do you think there's a real sense that organizations need to be responsible, this whole sense of responsibility in generating solutions?
Absolutely. You need to be, and it's just to clarify here as well, I'm not against AI. There's
Hmm.
a difference between questioning it philosophically, going, let's have a little bit deeper into what actually this could do to us moving forward as humans and as how we think. And if anyone is wondering what I'm like, what's she on about? Open up AI and get it to edit things, your emails. Get it to do it for 2 weeks. And then I want you to go back and write your email yourself. I guarantee you that you're going to notice that it has become harder for you now to write that email because you have outsourced it for a period of time. And that part of your brain then goes, oh, well, that's dealt with. You be kind of unlearn what you've just learned by using it too much. And if you unlearn more, like doing that with an email is no problem. But like if you start unlearning things to that degree that quickly by relying on it, what more will you unlearn that's actually a necessity for you? So if anyone ever, I always just say, just do it. Use it for one task for a couple of weeks and then go back and try to do the task yourself. And your brain will go, wait, what now?
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's right there is where I am a little bit cautious on the bigger things that AI can disrupt. Not
Okay.
the menial tasks like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. And just for leaders who are now in this digital world as such, and people have very different perspectives on it, different levels of knowledge, and they don't need to be deep experts, I suppose, but need to understand it. What would you be saying to leaders now who, have teams, have responsibilities, multiple stakeholders, in this world that we're existing in, which is moving at pace, of course?
And this is my perspective, right? So I'll put a disclaimer out there. The people that you are managing, so that you're going to know this yourself, Shirley, but like they are the key resource that you have. Okay. If you manage, and they are reflection as well, let's face it, people will reflect the management style. So if you're not managing well or not perceived to be managing well, you will see outcomes from your staff in relation to that. So in this sense, like happy staff, happy manager, and vice versa. Be more human. I think a lot of the time we're so focused on metrics, and we're all measured on metrics, right? But we're so focused on them that sometimes we lose sight that we're actually just humans all trying to work together. And some of us will work incredibly well together and others may not. And just instead of making rash judgments, just take a moment to try to understand people a little bit better. And when I say that, I don't mean leave people off with things or make allowances. It's not about that. But if you want to be a good leader, you have to be more than just able to have a following. You need to have a following of people who respect and are really committed to that. Because if you can create that, then you don't actually have to do much more. If people really firmly believe that you're fair and compassionate when you need to be, people tend to be quite happy with that. Just take the time, upskill yourself on the aspects around culture and cultural awareness, because most, I would say, if not half of the staff that you may have are coming from that scenario, and understanding where their lens and where they're coming from and the difficulties, you can actually help them by those small comments that I said. You can then, train your managers as well a little bit on that. And that can make the world of difference. We've seen it in consultancy things I've done. It's made the world of difference to employees when they feel that they're seen and that they're understood, especially when they're so fragile. When you're
Yeah.
coming from another culture, it just means the world. And it's such a small ask, really. And so
Yeah.
easy to do. It's so easy to do.
That phrase, be more human, it's so simple in many ways, but, particularly in the world that we're in at the moment, it's
Yeah.
absolutely essential to remember it. Eimear, I've loved this conversation, and I know there's lots of different things that we could be talking about, but unfortunately I do have to bring it to a close. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you just, for some of those really great nuggets of wisdom, actually, that are so relevant to organisations and leaders, and not just in the education field, but, in the broader industry field as well. So thank you very much indeed, Eimear.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me, Shirley.